Hello, welcome to this video on note reading for trumpet players. This is absolute step one introduction, as if you've never had to read traditional music notation, all the lines and circles and stuff before. The very first thing that you'll see here is our stair climbing pattern, and this should be very familiar to you by now. We've been practicing this for weeks on our instruments. You've probably seen it written like this. If there's a whiteboard in your lesson room, then you will have definitely seen me show C, D, E, F, G moving upwards and written upwards like this to represent the fact that F and G, because they're written much higher, they're going to sound much higher than C and D. The main thing we want to take from this is that in music, as a sound moves higher, we move forwards in the alphabet. And as a sound moves lower in pitch, sounding lower, we're kind of going backwards in the alphabet. So for example, the note E here, as we move lower in sound, E, D, we're moving backwards in the alphabet. Now this may seem really obvious to some of you, but there is a reason I'm going to point out the obvious now, that as notes go higher, we move forwards, and as notes sound lower, we move backwards. The reason I'm pointing that out now is because it is going to be super useful. We are going to find the simplest way possible to read notes on one of these things. Now, this set of 5 lines moving across the page there is called a stave. In some areas they call it a staff. Stave, staff, same thing. It is the 5 lines moving across the page. For trumpet music, you will also have one of these at the start of every line. This funny squiggly thing, you may have seen this before. That funny squiggly thing there is called a treble clef. Treble meaning high sounding, and clef, I think it's the Italian or French word for key or something. But basically, if you see that treble clef squiggle, that tells you that the music is written for a high sounding instrument, like a trumpet. So, we have our stave, which is our 5 lines going across. We have a treble clef. There might be a few other things at the start of the line. You might get some numbers, for example, 4, 4. You might get something like that at the start of the line. We're not worried about those things for now. What we want to determine is the simplest way to read notes, which are going to be the circles that get added to this. Because when you start working from your Sound Innovations Book 1, or if you're not one of my students and you play from different books, this is going to apply to any of those. When you're reading notation in books like these, it's not going to be written in letter names. It's going to be written using circles and lines. Notation is what we call that. So, what I'd like you to imagine for a moment is that on our stave, we now have a ladder. So picture a ladder in your head. Maybe it would look like this. And then you'd have the rungs of the ladder being the things that you put your hands and feet on. So we need to add some of those. There we go. That's a pretty good ladder, if I do say so myself. Let's add the ground underneath it. We might need some dirt. We might need a bit of grass. Okay, there we have an amazingly artistic ladder. Now the key thing that we're going to do here is we are going to take our note E, which we have played 18,000 times at this point, or at least if you've been practicing regularly, at least 18,000 times. That note E there is always going to live on the first rung of our ladder. So I'm going to draw a blue circle there. Boom. Now, if you were to move that right next to our ladder, it would still be positioned on that very bottom line. E, the middle note of our stair climbing, is always going to live on that very bottom line. The note is represented by a circle. It does not matter if the circle is empty or coloured in, or even if it was some other weird shape, like a diamond or something. If it's on that first rung of the ladder, where you're going to put your first foot, that is always the note E. Let's just move the strum stick. So, what this then tells us is our starting point, and that is the only thing that's new that you need to remember? So the first thing that you needed to remember was that music follows the alphabet letters. So as the notes go higher, the letters go forward in the alphabet. As they go lower, they go backwards in the alphabet. The second thing that you need to remember, and there's only 2 or 3 things here, the second thing is that E is always the bottom rung of our ladder. So there's our E note on the bottom of the 5 lines of the stave, always an E. Doesn't matter if it's coloured in or not, what shape it is, that's an E. Final thing that you need to know is that when you go one step higher or lower, for example, E to F is one musical step, one step in the alphabet, you go from a line to a space. So the space between the E rung of our ladder and then that next rung, hopefully you can see it, I know it's a bit dark in here, the space between those, if we put a note there, is going to give us the note F. For example, if I put a note right there in that bottom space between the first 2 rungs of the ladder, that's going to be the note F. Once again, it does not matter if it's coloured in or not coloured in, not interested. That's going to be an F, and then if that was in a space, going one more step takes us back to another line, which would be the next rung on our ladder. So I'm going to draw that on there. Boom. That means that this line here above the E, if you had a note drawn there, that would be G. Now this is where, if you've ever had class music or you've played piano, you go, hang on, bottom line was E, second line up, this is the second rung of our ladder. If that's a G, because we've gone E, F, G, I've heard this before, every good boy deserves fruit. Yes, that is another way of remembering this, but really all I want you to do is remember that the bottom one is always E. And from there, you can work out any other note by going up step, step, step. So line to a space is one step, space to a line, that's your next step. If we were going down the opposite direction, and this is all spelled out at the start of your Sound Innovations book, pages 4 and 5, they've got this written out. If we were going downwards in pitch, E, D, stepping down, E is on the bottom rung, D would be the space between the ground and the first rung of the ladder. So down here, not quite touching the ground yet, let's just extend our ground. D is not quite touching the ground, that's one note lower than E, because sounding lower, alphabet goes backwards. All right, I think I'm labouring the point here. The only other note that we don't know yet is C. They do show you this on page 5 of Sound Innovations, but if D is in the space just above the ground itself is going to be the note C. So I'm just going to extend our ground a little bit further along here. There's the ground, lovely. And C gets to be right on the ground in our ladder picture. Boom, that's C. That was D right above it. I'm just going to make sure that you can actually see the diagram. Let's angle this. Boom. This is the key thing. We've got to make sure you can see this. E was on the very bottom line, first rung of our ladder. Underneath that rung was D, and the ground itself is C. And then we continued upwards. If we were going from the ladder rung to the space above it, that gave us F. And then to the line above that, the second rung of the ladder, that would be G. And then using this system of following the alphabet, you could work out any note you needed. I could draw a note that you've never played on the trumpet before. For example, that rung of the ladder there, that's the 4th line up on the stave, or the 4th rung of our ladder. And we can simply follow the alphabet to work out what that is. Bottom rung was E, the space was F, the next rung will be G, the next space will be A, because in music, after you get to a G, if you keep moving higher, it goes back to A again. A, B, C, that would be a D note. Yes, there is a higher version of the note D. By next year, you'll be playing it. And that's it. So basically, instead of trying to memorize every good boy deserves fruit, or face in the space, or just know that the middle line's this and the 4th line up is this, we just need to remember one thing. our ladder. Bottom rung of the ladder is always E. And from there, just by using the alphabet and going space one step, line second step, space third step, and following the alphabet, you can work out any other note that you ever need to read. Coloured in, not coloured in, with a stick coming off it, no stick, doesn't matter. All that matters is where they've put the head of the note, which is the circle usually, and you can then go from E to work out what you need to know. Page 5 of Sound Innovations introduces this very simply. You get to start off with a bunch of E's, then they show you D, and you play a bunch of those. Use the backing track, play along with that. Some of you will have a CD that you can put into a video game console or a computer or a DVD player if your family has one. Some of them will have a link for online recordings. Good luck. Your job is to get all the way up to page 8 and 9 of Sound Innovations, listening to the recordings and playing along. It should be pretty self-explanatory. Good luck, have fun, email me with any questions, and remember our ladder, bottom rung of the ladder, always E. If you've got that down, you're in a pretty good place. You'll find this gets easier and easier with a few minutes each day. Enjoy.